Hello there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and today I'm joined by my father, Dr. Scott Keith, and our friend, Debi Winrich. How are you doing, Debi?
I'm doing great.
Debi is on the show because she's involved at 1517 a lot. And
from the beginning.
From the very beginning.
Yeah.
The baby, the infancy.
Before our show was a twinkle in 1517's eye.
Before I was involved.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to say, have you been on the Thinking Fellows?
No, I've been on Virtue in the Wasteland
right.
in one of the very first episodes.
And you were on. You have a new podcast at 1517.
I do. That's why I'm here.
That's the big deal. And she did it with Dan Van Voris, who is the host of Virtue in the Wasteland.
Yes.
And that podcast launched during the Here We Still Stand conference this year. So we were able to share it with everybody who went there. So if you went to Here We Still Stand and listening to this,
you better well have downloaded it.
There you go. And the name of your podcast is The Soul of Christianity.
Yes.
And so we're going to spend an episode today talking about that show so that listeners of the Thinking Fellows can get a taste of what it is and also why they should go listen to it because, I say this about a lot of our shows, but it really is complimentary because the style is certainly different and unique. In fact, it's very well produced, probably the most heavily produced show we've had on the network. And the topic is Christian doctrine still.
It is.
And you did it from an order that we haven't done on Thinking Fellows. So while we did it from Reformation systematic theology, you guys followed the Apostles' Creed.
Yes, and we recorded it out of order, though. That's what was interesting. We recorded it when people were available, so that was a challenge to have your brain
wrapped around doing the creed out of order.
We were doing episode 8, in the beginning,
The first one recorded.
And so Dan and I had to be. It's like the talk shows on television that record, 3 or 4 days ahead, and they have to remember that it's not Christmas yet.
That's funny. Have you ever heard some of the Lutheran theologians will say that the Christian engages in their life the Apostles' Creed essentially backwards if they're baptized as a baby, because they're called into the church at their baptism, and then they, the thing they hear the most about is the redemption of Christ, and then they sort of encounter God as Father by means of Christ, and so it's kind of, we do it in one way, but sometimes it is the creed itself isn't locked into being understood or confessed that way, but we do it, because we confess it in church.
We're used to it that way.
Yeah.
But so we did it out of order, but it was fun.
So you guys approached it from sort of the classical breakdown, which is 11 parts of the creed, right?
12.
12. So you have 12 episodes in there, and what that kind of means for listeners is that this is what is referred to as a serial podcast.
Yeah, we dropped it all at once.
Yeah, and so whereas the Thinking Fellows, for those who aren't listening, like deep in the podcast world, Thinking Fellows is a weekly show. We have one show every week, and then we do that, 365. The serial podcasts are like Netflix binge type of deal where you guys recorded 12 episodes and we picked a date and all 12 episodes are available.
Yes.
And so
I like them. I like the idea of them too, and I like them because they seem, in a way, it's less of a commitment than subscribing to Thinking Fellows or Virtue or something like that, or a weekly podcast, because that you're sort of getting. Again, it's like binging a Marvel series on Netflix. You're getting a lot out of it, but you're not having to put a lot of time into it.
Well, and I think you can get overwhelmed these days with so many podcasts. Yeah. What am I going to listen to now?
Yeah.
And this is kind of a short commitment, Although I've heard people saying they want to listen to it again, but it can be, you can commit, okay, I'm going to do this and finish it. And then feel like you really accomplished something.
Yeah.
I think at the end. So
this is one of the shows that'll be on the 1517 Podcast Network, right? Just like Thinking Fellows, Virtue in the Wasteland. We have 13 shows on the network now. Right, Caleb?
Yeah, 13 shows now when you count them all up. Some of those are, one of them's daily, so the blogcast is daily now. Some of those are serial, so Soul of Christianity is serial. This is its first season. It will have more.
It will. We're working on season 2.
Which is good, and we know sort of what it took to do it this time, and so now it's
I think we'll do it quicker.
Yeah, so it's good. We have one other serial podcast called Family Style Theology by Cindy Koch, and she has one season out right now. Second season is recorded, is in post-production, so that will also be coming out soon. And then we have a bunch of weekly podcasts.
1517 Podcasts is a content juggernaut right now.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, so 1517.org/podcast is how people can get that. And Soul of Christianity. So I have a tracker that shows me daily sort of where things move in the iTunes rankings. And you guys hopped into the top 40 for a couple days there. So that's pretty
Oh my goodness.
look at
Oh my
you.
goodness.
So-
I don't know what to say.
Oh, yeah.
So it's so thank you
I'm
to people who
verklempt.
subscribe. So you can
Maybe Thinking Fellows can help them move in the top 20.
that's what we're
Yeah,
hoping.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, people out
Listen
there.
up.
So please go subscribe.
Download rate, only 5 stars count.
Yeah. So I kind of want to talk about the uniqueness of the show. So you guys, it's not only podcast, but there's also sort of a musical element off it, right? You guys are playing off of the word soul.
Yeah. Dan and I first of all, if you want to know the story, the long
Yeah, I want to
story.
know why the name, too.
The long story of why Dan and I are doing the podcast, or why we did it, and why we're going to continue to do more Soul of Christianity podcasts or series seasons is what I'm saying. You can go to the website, and on the About, you click on the About, and I wrote an essay about it, and it's the history of Dan and Debi, and it's a tribute to Dan too, more than anything else, but it kind of explains why we're together. But one of the things that we have discovered in our friendship of over 10 years is our mutual love for a number of genres of music, one being soul music, 60s soul particularly. If you know Wilson Pickett, Sam and Dave, that era, and a little bit of the blue-eyed soul. But anyway, we discovered a couple of years ago that we love that music. And so that was kind of put in our back pocket. And then when we started doing this podcast, we were talking about how we needed something that was a little bit in between Thinking Fellows and Virtue in the Wasteland. And something done by a layperson, or someone who's not a theologian, someone who's not a pastor, but and someone who has questions. And Dan and I were talking about it, and we thought, well, who could do it? And then he said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, oh, God, okay, here we go. So
That's how it always happens, right? Somebody needs to mop this floor.
yeah,
Well, here's a mop.
gulp. Okay, here I go. And so we felt like we needed someone who would stop and ask the questions when big words were used, or terminology that maybe not everyone understands, even if you're a Christian, you may not understand the terms. And so and then we started thinking, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to format it? I mean, how do we said, let's talk about the basics of Christianity. How are we going to do that? And so he came up with the Apostles' Creed, and then the name just I came up with one day thinking, well, how do we scrape it down? Down to the soul.
Well, there it is.
Oh, ding!
There it is.
you go. And then I said, we got to have music because I'm a musical person.
Yep.
I have 3 musician sons. We have a studio in our home. So I said, we got to have soul music. And then Caleb, you know how hard we tried to get.
I had to be the harbinger of doom on some of
Yeah,
them.
we tried to get the rights to actual songs, and we weren't able to do it. But
Yeah, I mean, a lot of listeners probably don't realize that the podcast genre and the licensing of music to play with podcasts has not really been legally worked out.
no, it's very gray area.
And it's different than radio. A lot of
Because
podcasters
podcasts are permanent.
Try to deal with it as radio, but it's not. So it's very difficult to
It's
get
very difficult.
licensed music to play on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we ended up doing is I commissioned my middle son, Kelly Winrich. Shout out to my son, very talented. I said, can you make some sound-alikes for me? And And I knew he could do it.
Yeah.
But he said I'd be happy to. So in a weekend, you guys,
He like locked himself in the studio.
13.
Wow.
To 13, I'd say, what'd you say? They're all about 30 seconds long.
Yeah.
30 or 40 seconds long. He did my theme music, and then what we've done in each podcast, and I think I've gotten a lot of feedback about this, and this is how I like to listen to podcasts. I like to have some breathing time in between the sections. So what we did was we broke it up by questions that I'm asking the guests, and we have a little musical interlude in between the questions. So it kind of breaks it up, and every episode is like that, although every episode is different because I have a different guest, but so the music is interspersed. And we do have a playlist, a Spotify playlist on the website that you can go to, and you can see the actual songs I wanted to use for the episodes. There's a little humor involved. For example, I wanted to use Proud Mary with Ike and Tina Turner for Born of the Virgin Mary. And it sounded, we put it in and tried it, and it sounded wonderful.
That's a clever workaround, too, by the way.
Yeah. So we had more fun picking those songs when we thought we could use them.
Yes.
And so anyway, that's how it's broken down. But so we picked the name Soul of Christianity using the soul music, and found a friend to do my intro who's been in broadcasts and entertainment for years, has a very upbeat voice, and went for it.
Yeah.
And
people will tell us that the Thinking Fellow sounds good, and I give a lot of credit to Scott Osborne, who set up this wonderful rig that we get to record on that basically does most of that work to make it sound good. But this show, as you can tell by the way we're talking about it, was very intentionally planned, produced. Everything's done very professionally. So if you think the Thinking Fellow sounds good, your ears are going to be blown away when you listen to
my
this.
son Kevin was the engineer for that. He does that. He's a live sound engineer and a recording engineer by trade. So he engineered the whole thing, and we recorded it at my house. Most of them, they're over the telephone, which is a tricky thing. You've got to have some good equipment for that. And then I did a few face-to-face, but more on the phone.
Yeah.
So.
And so one of the other things, so the website's really helpful here, and it works like the rest of our podcasts. If you download the show, there's show notes with links in them, and one of those links is various Bible studies. It's basically every episode, all of the I would say the key things that each guest said about the particular line of the creed. Yeah. So it's just kind of helping you think it through. Yeah, I'll read an example here. So this is just from the first episode, which you guys, broke it down into the various phrases in the creed. So it's, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven
and earth, yeah.
So you have actually questions. So before you listen to the show, think about the fact that we say I when we recite the creed and what it means. What is underneath the we, there's always an I. Mm-hmm. So thinking about your personal confession in this creed. Yeah, we talked about and then number two, because of the material of this episode, what is God as Father? What does that mean? And so I think this is great because you're trying to, if people actually do go in with this, they're going to get a lot of good study out of this. So people are constantly asking us, how do you do that? You could do a group thing with this, and there's a lot of discussion points on, that's what those are. And
so I have, it's interesting to me. I remember when you were talking about this more than a year ago, it feels like to me now.
It was a long time ago.
One of the things that you pointed out, which is just absolutely true, is that 1517 is full of a bunch of, I think you call them smarty pants.
Smart guys.
Smart guys, yeah.
With lots of letters behind their names.
Behind their names. And sometimes the fact that that's the case, means that we don't always communicate things at the lay level, even if we think we are.
Yeah, that was I talked in the beginning,
And we try, but, it's just an effect of, I guess, learning as much as you've learned is if you don't remember what you didn't know 15 years ago. Yeah, exactly. Or what you didn't understand, or words that you didn't understand 15 years ago, and you sort of just end up throwing them around. And that the intention behind this was to eliminate that.
Or for me to call out when a word is used, like I said earlier, when a word is used or a concept or whatever. And I come at it I've told Scott this many times, the phrase cradle Lutheran. I'm not a cradle Lutheran.
Well, that's what I wanted to get at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your church history, your church life history is not, I mean, probably getting there now
because you've been
here for 20 years, but it's not primarily Lutheran.
No.
And that you and your husband Kurt, were very involved in various evangelical churches for 40 years.
Yeah, many years.
And that, confessing the creed, as is very common to many of our Lutheran listeners,
is not
a common experience to you. And so
No.
I really see Soul of Christianity as one of our biggest opportunities for, I hate using in-house words like outreach, but I'll say like outreach to non-Lutheran audiences because you're really explaining the creed at a cradle level. That's maybe a good way to say it.
Yeah.
And calling out when those of us who've been doing this for a long time are using words that people in your former churches would have had no clue
idea
what the heck
it
we're
meant.
meaning.
Yeah. Which to us, I learned a lot more doctrine coming into the Lutheran confession that I ever learned in the evangelical church. Maybe in the very beginning I learned a few things, but I do remember the word propitiation way back. But
That's funny. Well, and you went to a Christian college and you took doctrine courses, and so you were probably more.
I did. It was actually the first time that was early, and Dr. Rosenblatt was my doctrine teacher.
Yeah.
In a couple of the episodes I talk about that, and that was the beginning for us, and learning that, and he talked about the three, Calvinism, Lutheranism, Arminianism, and way back then. So I was familiar then, and that was in the 70s. But then, I continued to be in evangelical churches. My husband and I were worship leaders and leadership positions and all of that.
Well, yeah, and now within Lutheranism, I think it'd be fair to say that you guys are both, you and Kurt both are very educated lay people. I mean, you've taught the high school class at our local Lutheran congregation here for 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And you guys don't get a curriculum from the national church body and sit down and let them color and do the thing. You put them through the ringer. You guys are teaching them apologetics and evangelism and the defense of the faith and Christian doctrine.
Yeah, and they love it.
Yeah.
Don't think the youth don't want to, young people don't want to learn this stuff. They do.
Yeah. Well, and I guess what I'm saying.
Because it's real. I mean, we're not, doing, it's a small group now, but when it was larger, we didn't do anything to try to rein them in and get them in the door and special programs and all of this. We just taught them the word and taught them doctrine. And
yeah. I mean, my point is that you guys are smart, quote unquote, smart guys too. And what you're able to do is, remember when you were learning.
When I was learning,
Yeah, and to bring this to there. So it's not like, if you hear Debbie saying this, listeners, don't think she doesn't understand the big words. She does. She's just remembering when she was learning them.
Yeah.
And helping us with that because we don't remember that all the time.
And what you'll hear a lot in a number of the episodes is you will hear, I was talking to someone about this last night, there are times I talk about my personal journey. We all use that word, journey. There's a before and after for me, and the big one is when I was in the evangelical church, and you're going to hear this in episodes, it was very transactional with God, using that phrase. Everything was a transaction. If you do this, then God will do this. There was no, it is finished.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I never heard one of the wonderful things about being in a Lutheran church or a liturgical church where you take the supper and they use those words for you. That's been just life-changing over the last 20 years, that it's for me and it's done for me and it's finished for me.
Well, and the good thing about doing the Apostles' Creed is it's not about what you do for
No,
God.
it's not. It's all
all about
all what
what God
has
does.
done. That's what the whole thing is. It's all pointing to, I think I said this before. It's about Jesus. I mean, really,
Yep.
ultimately, and his finished work.
Yeah.
And so,
When we say in our theology that Jesus is at the center of everything, you can even see that in the Apostles' Creed. He's that third article of the Creed, he's at the center of the Creed.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's good the Apostles' Creed allows you to, immediately approach a non-Lutheran audience, right? The Apostles' Creed is, the basics of Orthodox Christian belief. And so even you talking about evangelicals not confessing this, in church services, I don't think you're going to run into many who, once you lay it out, are going to disagree with the Apostles' Creed. So it's sort of, neutral ground too, where it's something that even our Lutheran listeners should be probably reading themselves more, because it's part of our liturgy.
Yeah,
and so
it is.
becomes habit just to say it. But Luther really breaks it down in the Small Catechism, and it's important to sort of revisit these things that have become part of the back of our memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was funny for me in listening to this, is that beyond confessing the Apostles' Creed in church, I'd say over the last, how old am I now?
Old.
Yeah, 40 some odd years.
Oh, God.
40,
You're a baby.
You're 46, right?
Yeah. But
You're an infant.
since my confirmation days, the way that I've engaged the Apostles' Creed the most is by means of Luther's catechisms, right? And so my mind often thinks in terms of Luther's explanation of the meanings as much as it does the individual sections of the creed, which, if you're going to a Lutheran grammar school like I was, and a Lutheran church, and taking confirmation twice and everything, you memorize those as much as you memorize the actual lines of the creed. But hearing the people explain it differently, and not all of them in the context of Luther's catechisms, I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is a way I haven't necessarily heard this before.
Yeah. It was interesting, each one. So
yeah, because there are several people on the list who are not Lutheran.
no, we have our Jared Wilson, who is Jared C. Wilson, because there is another Jared Wilson out there in the interweb land. He's we joke and call him our token Baptist, and he's spoken at our first Here We Still Stand.
He did a great job.
Oh, he's wonderful, and
at a city event.
Yeah, and he's going to be in 2020, right? He's going to, or Nick, he can't do 2020.
No, he's 2020.
Yeah, so we had Jared, and then I have some Anglicans.
Yeah.
Debbie's allowing listeners to look behind the curtain of future plans for Here We Still Stand.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oops. You can bleep that out. So I know Kevin had to bleep out. I said a bad word.
Uh-oh.
And in one of the episodes. And
you want to keep your iTunes clean, right?
And so Kevin.
that's to Donovan.
Kevin asked me. No, it was Sarah Condon, and in the very last episode. And if you want to listen to that first, I don't care, listeners, but I said something, and my son was editing it, and he called me, said, "Mom, do you think I should keep this in?" And I go, you know what, I think it's better, just bleep it, and people can use their imagination. So it's bleeped, but...
One of the podcasts I listen to does that all the time.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but they keep their clean rating, and it's like 6 bleeps per show.
Yeah, so anyways, what were we talking about? I'm sorry, I got distracted.
Non-Lutherans explaining the creed.
Yeah, so anyway.
Dave Zoll, too.
Dave Zoll, he's Anglican. Well, we have Aaron Zimmerman, who is a rector at a Episcopal Church, Anglican Church in Waco, Texas. He did the Virgin Mary, and it's one of my favorite episodes, actually. Didn't know Aaron was so darn smart when I started looking at his bio. Man, that man has a lot. But he's a wonderful guy and very funny, and but knows his Virgin Mary, I'll tell you. And
that's funny.
So yeah, so we have, it's different. Everyone's different. Because when you talk to somebody with a different, it's going to come out different. It's me every time and Dan every time, but the spice of it is these different people. Yeah.
Well, and Dave Zoll, who I like to say is a Law Gospel Anglican. I mean,
Oh, he is.
when you hear him teach, you wouldn't necessarily. I think a lot of Lutherans could hear Dave Zoll teach and say, "Man, I've never heard of this guy. Where's he been?"
Yeah, where has
Yeah.
we had some friends come this last time to Here We Still Stand, or some Canadian friends, and after Dave spoke, they said, where's this guy been? Who is this guy?
Yeah.
I'm checking him out. Yeah, just has a way of communicating, and the Law and Gospel, he gets it.
Yeah,
he sure does.
Mockingbird
Mockingbird
Ministries.
Yeah.
Sees over. I'll put a link to them.
Yeah, Dave is from Mockingbird, and Sarah Condon and Aaron. They're all three from
And you have a pretty big name in here too. You had Mike Horton on.
Mike Horton, and I chose Mike because Mike is a person. Whitehorse Inn had a huge impact on my life. Number one, it reintroduced me to Rod Rosenblatt, who I had lost contact with since I had gone to Westmont in the back last century.
The last century.
And so that was a wonderful thing. And then we began to listen to it, and that helped us. That was a catalyst for where we are now.
Oh, wow.
Really, it is. It is.
Yeah.
And so he had a huge impact.
That's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Whitehorse Inn. And
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people that are in Lutheranism from hearing Rod on an essentially Calvinist radio show.
Yeah.
Which was called the Whitehorse Inn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people that that's the case.
But
for.
Mike can articulate the faith so clearly and so well, and he's so gracious, and it was, I really enjoyed it. And it was, and it's he did the resurrection, and it's very informative, and I think you'll enjoy it if you listen to it. So.
And you had Rod on,
Rod,
of course,
yes.
and Rod did
Jesus. Who else?
Yeah.
He's on
Two
episode
Natures
2.
of Christ and all of that.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, I had my pastor, Ron Hodel,
Yep.
and I thought, I'm going to do the forgiveness of sins. Why not have my pastor, who says that to me, gives me the forgiveness of sins every week at my church. So, yeah.
And Ron does, man.
He does.
Yeah.
He does.
He brings it. He brings the goods.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So.
And then you had our friend Delwyn Campbell on, who we just met in, was it Hattiesburg or New Jersey?
New Jersey. I didn't
Jersey.
go to New Jersey, but I haven't met him personally yet. But I'll tell you, I talked to him for 2 solid hours. And it's not a 2-hour episode, everybody. Don't get worried. But we cut it down. But I just thought of this yesterday. We talked about doing a bonus episode of his story, because he does tell his story of how he ended up being a Lutheran pastor. And he's an African-American man in Gary, Indiana.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very difficult area to work.
He's essentially a mission pastor.
It's a mission
in Gary,
pastor.
Indiana. For
But
the
just think Black Gospel and Luther. And
yeah, it's intriguing to hear real
Yes,
life. I mean, there's something
amazing.
powerful about it.
Yeah, so we slice and dice that one up to make it, short enough. But there's a whole part that he tells a story that I think we need to, put that out there as a bonus thing at some point.
Yeah, I think we should drop in the show notes. We can find it, I'm sure, but it gets complicated because it's the LCMS. But there's a link you could dig for it and find it, Caleb. A link to where people can donate a little bit of money to help
his mission.
Del
Yes,
Campbell
please
keep up this mission
help
in
him
Gary,
out.
Indiana.
Yes.
Again, it's not the easiest thing to find, but if we can find it and drop it in the show notes,
yeah, that's a good
that'd
idea.
be real helpful.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. That's something I can find.
So in the Lutheran camp, we have Donovan Riley.
Yeah, he's one of our, I don't know what to call him, best guests, most successful guests on this show.
Yeah, I mean he's one of those guys who, when we bring him on an episode,
Just put a microphone in front of him.
That's what we do. Yeah.
Just say, here.
Yeah.
Start.
Yeah.
He was on one of the Here We Still Stand special episodes that we recorded there.
Yeah.
We talked
Christ in all the scriptures.
Yep, Christ in all the scriptures. And then you and he did an episode where
went out to his house in Minnesota.
Dr. Keith recorded it, sent me the audio, and I listened to this thing. I was like, I don't know what to name this. You guys didn't stick with one topic, so I just named it Scott and Donovan Talk About Everything.
Yeah. Well, he was the right hand of the Father, and
he's great on that because one of his bailiwicks is Bondage of the Will, which is the first time we had him on the show years ago. That's what he did, and he's his perspective on that is just it's so good.
Yeah, I had to stop him a few times because he just goes, you know, and says, I go, what? Wait. And he can also snap your neck probably in a twinkling of an eye. Is a very, what does he do? Jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So
he's part of the jiu-jitsu cult.
He's a ripped Lutheran pastor who could snap your neck.
And he's on Banned Books.
Banned Books, and doesn't he do another podcast for Higher Things?
He does a podcast for Higher Things. I think it's called As Lutheran as It Gets.
Yeah. So he's out there. And
it shows up on if you go to Soul Christianity on iTunes, and you should, and rate it. Believe it or not, I mean, a lot of listeners don't even know how much rating a show helps.
Yes, please rate us.
Yeah,
it really helps people makes it easier to find the show on iTunes and on search engines if it gets ratings. And really, you know, unless you have a really good reason, 5 stars help. Be honest with your rating, but just really...
No, don't.
Just know.
Put 5 stars.
You can complain in the comments.
Right, yeah.
Or give constructive criticism.
Or you can send them an email on the info if you really got something to say.
Yeah, if you have something in your craw, email us directly.
But generally, I mean, 5 stars really helps if you've enjoyed it.
It's like when I was selling cars at a car dealership, they send a survey to the customer, you know, a couple weeks later, and literally, if you got it was out of 10. If you got a 9, you could be punished for a 9.
I mean, it's like this. If you thought the podcast,
ladies and gentlemen, I won't be punished for a 4.
Well, but if you ever had that one professor in college who, no matter how well you did or how great your work was, they're like, oh, I just don't give A's. You know, so you get a 92, you get an A minus. If you really liked the podcast and you thought it was good, and there was one little thing you didn't like, and you give it 4.5 or 4 stars for that, you're that one professor. You're that professor that doesn't give A's.
Tell us why, though. We want to know. We're adults. We can take criticism.
Well, I've told people that too. If you really do have, with any of our shows, a major critique, just send us an email and ask a question.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
We actually answer them.
We do.
Yeah.
So.
And then you had, you already mentioned her, but Sarah Condon on.
Yes, Sarah she's an
Episcopal priest.
And everybody, I'm sure everyone just fainted when I just said that. And she's a woman. We're going to get letters. Yeah, she's in Houston, Texas. In fact, she just this week, as we're recording this, she was at George H.W. Bush's church.
Yeah, that's
and so funeral was there, and she was part of that, and she had lots of pictures with famous people. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Wow.
Well,
and she preached to Lady Gaga once.
Oh.
She came to her church.
Pretty excited about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she's there.
And I've heard her teach, and she brings the goods.
She does. And she's very funny. And but I chose her because she did the very last episode, which is An Everlasting Life. And she had just gone through the Houston flood. In fact, she wasn't there. She fled to her mother's home, her childhood home in Mississippi, but her husband stayed, who's also on staff he's a rector, I believe, and he stayed and worked and helped. But when she returned, what she saw, and there was death all around, So I think my favorite thing she said, though, out of the whole podcast is when we were talking to her about this, she said, and she's from Mississippi, so she's got that accent. She says, some days when I'm walking down the halls of this church, I think, someday this is all going to be over. Because it's hard.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, so we had a great conversation about that line of the creed, and a lot of humor, and
that's good.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, and interestingly enough, because of that service for George H.W. Bush, the Apostles' Creed has been in the news lately.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
isn't
it
that
has.
funny? You should
Because-
be trending.
Okay, you know, President Trump. Wasn't it? He wasn't participating.
He didn't recite it, and so it brought up. It was interesting because even the secular world all of a sudden cared about somebody,
the Apostles' Creed.
somebody reciting the Apostles' Creed
Gee
or not.
whiz.
And so, so if you've been seeing that, and you're like, maybe I should go read the Apostles' Creed.
Yeah, go read the
again, too.
Apostles' Creed.
Yeah. But and that's the theme of next year's Here We Still Stand conference as well.
It is
the common faith, and we're doing that based on sort of the tenets of the Apostles' Creed.
Now, maybe I'm pulling back the curtain to Here We Still Stand. Will Soul of Christianity be at the podcast day?
That is the plan so far. As long as
yeah, we might. I haven't even talked to Dan about what we would do, but maybe we could, if some of the people that we interviewed are there, we
You
can
do a big
actually
show.
do a little panel or something.
I call it the megacast.
Yeah, the megacast or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do
You do
that.
like Thinking Fellows and have 7 people.
Oh, that's too many.
it is a lot. That's like one of the big worries with that is like you start figuring out how much time you have, and like everybody's got 3 minutes and 45 seconds to talk. That's like before you gotta cut them off.
Yeah. One person you didn't mention is Pastor John Bombaro, who did Descended into Hell. Didn't he do that line?
Looks like it.
Yeah. Now that's another one. You have to hold onto your hats. He's like Donovan Riley. The amount of information that he had in his brain. He's actually now a chaplain full time, right, in Lutheran Church. But at that time when I interviewed him, he was still at a church in San Diego. But anyway, that's another one that is chock full of, I think during that episode I would say, right, oh, wow. He was so amazing. I just was flabbergasted most of the time. So,
yeah. So I mean, we're pretty close to time, and so before we close out, I really do not just as a point of hey, this is something else at 1517. We really like the downloads, so go download this. No, I really think there is great value to people in this because it is a thorough study, like we said. That
let me say this: it's one that you can feel very comfortable sharing with your non-Lutheran friends. I have many non-Lutheran friends in my life that are old friends, that I've known for years and years, or believers who've been listening to it and love it. It's accessible, and but we do talk about Dan and I, our Lutheran faith in it. And we talk about, when I'm talking to the Anglicans, we talk about, well, in your church, you do this, and we do this. We talked about the differences, but anyway, you can share this with people who aren't in liturgical churches, non-Lutherans, and feel very comfortable sharing it.
And I really do encourage people to, if you listen on your phone, follow the links, maybe even on your computer. These Bible studies on here that go with it are really well.
Yeah, you guys have a sick website.
We do have
it's well laid out.
Sick website.
It's pretty good.
On the left-hand side are the verses that each one of the tenets of the Apostles' Creed are based off of. So you have all of the Bible verses that you can go to there. The questions for before, while, and after you listen are very well thought out in order to try to. It's sort of like in the small catechism, the why.
The why, yeah.
And I really like that approach.
Dan did a great job on that. I mean, I came up with most of that content, re-listening it 2 or 3 times and writing notes, but Dan put it all together, and
and this is the finishing headline under every one. Why is this good news?
Yeah, we wanted to bring it at the end of every podcast. Why is this hopeful? Why is this good news?
Yeah. Where
Bring
is
it
the
back
gospel
to that. Where's
in
the
every part
gospel
of the
in
Apostles'
this? Yes, yeah. So that was our goal, and we have Dan and I do a thing on each episode. We tell you what to listen for before the body of the podcast, and then afterwards. And I got this from the early. They started doing it again, but in the early days of Virtue in the Wasteland, they always did. Now, what did you learn, Dan? What did you learn, Jeff? It was my favorite part of that podcast because it helped me think back to what I was listening to and solidify what I learned. So, so we added that. So we do that at the end after the podcast. Dan and I come back together and we go, "What did you learn, Dan? What are the 2 things you learned today?" And so that's fun.
Very cool. So soulofchristianity.org. You can search Soul of Christianity on iTunes or any of your favorite podcasting
And thank you
apps.
for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming
Thank you for coming,
Thank
Debbie.
you for letting me be on your Testoster Fest.
Oh no, we have women on the show at least once a year.
Let's hear. I'm privileged.
Actually, you're the second. Kelsey was just on as well.
Yesterday
so
we talked about
we
it.
broke our streak.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very privileged. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming on. All right, close it, Caleb.
Yeah, thank you for listening to this episode.